Welcome to the People Dividend Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Horne. And today we're going to explore what it means to unlock bold leadership and embrace empowerment in a way that resonates with your identity. And my guest is someone who has not only inspired millions, but has redefined and is redefining what it means to lead with authenticity and confidence. So, John Wang is the author of Big Asian Energy and host of the podcast by the same name, which has garnered over 25 million views and 240,000 followers. As an executive coach and thought leader, John helps professionals transform self-doubt into confidence and step into bold leadership roles. John, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Mike. It's a pleasure.
John, your journey from growing up in what you describe, and I'm curious to hear what that description is of a traditional Asian household, to becoming a global voice for empowerment is incredible. So I want to get to what inspired you to write Big Asian Energy and how your upbringing shaped your perspective on leadership. Talk about your upbringing.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a topic that draws some curiosity every time I bring it up because it is something that many people who are not from, I would say, Asian countries might be aware of. And I want to preface that
Uh-huh.
everything I talk about isn't Asian specific. I use the term Asian because that's my own personal background. So my parents, they're from Taiwan. I was born in Taiwan, which is, for those who don't know, it's in East Asia. It's like one of the countries that's, tucked away next to China. Like many East Asian families, we come from what we call a collectivist environment. A collectivist culture basically prioritizes the family before yourself. So this is where it is that you often have those kind of maybe stereotyped depictions of the hard hitting, strict Asian parents, what we call tiger parents or tiger moms. And, we're focused on academic achievement and keeping our head down and working hard and these kind of core lessons. And I very much was brought up with that same advice, kind of like, oh, if you want to succeed, your job is to work hard, don't make waves, don't cause problems. And that's very much a standard perspective in my cultural background. And it wasn't until much later when I started going into the corporate world that I started realizing that some of the lessons that I've been taught, while they were very helpful for me in academic settings, were actually causing me to get held back. And I had started doing communication and leadership coaching and training in my 20s while working with others. And what I noticed was so many of the people who were coming through our programs who specifically were like me, Asian, had very similar patterns that we started seeing again and again and again. And it wasn't until I started seeing it through them and looking at through myself and seeing, oh wow, there's a way that we're showing up and the way that we're being seen that is actually affecting some of the struggles that we face, especially in areas like how do we get recognized for leadership, how do we build teams, how do we get recognized and seen for our contributions. And that was the starting point to working diving deeper into this work. And what we found was there are so many studies that showcase how Asian Americans are often viewed as being hardworking, good at things like technical skills or like math, but they are often seen as lacking leadership capabilities. We started realizing that it wasn't so much that they were lacking in leadership abilities, it's just that our leadership styles often differ. And a lot of that has to do with our culture taught communication styles.
And in your book and your podcast, again, I know we're speaking very broadly about Asian in this context, about overcoming cultural stereotypes. You talk about that. What do you mean by that? And what are some things you've encountered and how do they hold people back? Because I think stereotypes do, they hold people back.
Yeah, 100%. I so agree with you on that. There was a study that was done by, I think it was Ascend, which is an organization that tracks how perceptions influence those in the workplace. And what they found was that a significant, like I think it was something around the 60 or something percent of Asian Americans are viewed as being good, competent workers, what they call good workers, but not good leaders. So oftentimes that being held back is, we see Asian Americans and they're seen as, oh, this, they're very hardworking, they're good at what they do, they understand how to, like eat bitterness and work. That's a Chinese term, meaning like to work hard. But when they're graded on things like charisma or assertiveness, or they're what we usually see as leadership skills, oftentimes they're seen as lacking elements. And many of the clients that we're working with were also being told the same thing. They were being told, look, you're very good at what you do, but we're just not sure if you're leadership material. And maybe you need to take some training, etc., which is oftentimes how they come find us. But I think that this was very much a stereotype. I don't think that it has anything to do with how we're showing up as leaders, but rather how leadership is often framed, especially in a workplace context, where oftentimes it's seen as like, oh, we have to be individualistic and domineering and outspoken and be as loud as you can, which is not always in line with oftentimes cultural values from collectivist societies, which are maybe a little bit more focused on humility and humbleness and harmony.
So interesting. And, I don't think we need to get into it, but it'd be interesting to understand your thoughts in this regard. Stereotypes, positive stereotypes, negative stereotypes, or are stereotypes just what they are? I mean, they help us frame ranges of experience and help us to understand our own biases and how they might show up as in behaviors.
Yeah, that's a great question. Stereotypes are essentially shorthand placeholders. In other words, we use them to make quick judgments around other people. And there's no point trying to say demonizing or, like praising stereotypes, because stereotypes are just what we do naturally. When we meet somebody, our brain tries to gain a sense of who this person is. And that's essentially all there is. So I don't really believe that there is such a thing as negative or positive stereotypes. Stereotypes are just placeholders. The only question is, are we able to still see the person underneath the stereotypes or not? And I think that's the real important thing. Are we able to recognize the individual in spite of the stereotypes?
Who am I? Who am I to you? What are your unique roles and aspirations and hopes and concerns and fears? You've worked with many as an executive coach, John Wang,
Yeah, absolutely. There's a study I want to share more about stereotypes here. I'm curious to hear. Have you ever heard of the stereotype content model?
perhaps.
So it was a group of social psychologists who basically did a very long-term study. This thing started back in the 60s and that continued on to now. And essentially what they found was we really only view anyone we meet through the lens of two indexes. And what they are is competence and warmth. As in, whenever we meet someone, this is the only way we kind of grab a quick snapshot judgment of this individual. How competent are they? This is usually things like social status, how successful they've been, etc. And then warmth, how warm, engaging they are. So somebody we see as being highly competent and warm might be somebody you meet who's a friendly doctor, and we tend to view that person as having high social status as a result. Whereas somebody who might be very warm but not high on the competence scale might be like your grandma, somebody who's sweet and kind and loving, who we really appreciate. And a lot of people don't realize this, that anytime that we're meeting somebody and anytime we're being judged, essentially, those are the only two metrics that we're ever seen by. And so the more that we're able to embody the energy behind both, the more that we will be seen as charismatic, capable, likable, and as leaders.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I love the lack of complication there. In some ways, it reminds me of Will Schutz's theories, a social psychologist, on the degrees of inclusion, control, and affection or warmth that drive most interpersonal behavior.
Hmm.
So that's another framework, I think, on his pioneering work as a social psychologist. So, but what are some of the biggest challenges you think? Is that the challenge that executives face? This continuum of competence and warmth? Is that the biggest challenge that executives face when it comes to finding their voice in leadership roles?
I think that it is something that we don't always recognize as being something important for us to focus on, especially around that element. We oftentimes are very familiar with competence. We know how to self-advocate. We know how to make sure that our strengths and strong suits are being seen and recognized by others. But one thing that we don't often think about is the warmth that we are viewed as in
Mhm.
and how that might influence those metrics. Are we being too warm? Are we being not warm enough? How does that show up? And essentially, you could take a look at one of the things that we do is just simply run through somebody's email past, like what was the last 30 emails you sent? If we take a look at how it is that your communication, your leadership style, how do you deliver critical feedback to your team? These are all things that contribute to whether or not we're seen as leaders. And a lot of times those are the metrics that we need to focus on a little bit more of, am I being seen to as too cold and assertive, or am I being seen as warm and welcoming?
Yes. How do leaders embrace cultural identity while also breaking free from limiting beliefs?
When we're talking about the idea of cultural identity, I think it's complex because identities automatically have labels on them. And I think what we could be simply starting being a little bit more inclusive of is just the different styles of how we communicate. One of the things that we take a look at is that, we have what's called high versus low context communication style. I'll give you an example. I recently, last year, I went to Japan. And while I was there, one thing I really loved about those locally is that they bow when they meet someone. And it was an interesting thing because I stand imagine like you were going into a business meeting and you have two CEOs who meet each other. Now, if they're doing this in Japan, they would start by saying hi and they will bow to one another and they would speak very politely. They would focus on being humble. They would praise the other side first. But if you take the same dynamic and recreate that, took one of the CEOs and moved them to New York, you can imagine how that different cultural context and communication context would really influence how that person's behaviors as a leader would be seen. Imagine two high-powered CEOs walking up to one another, and the first one immediately starts bowing and apologizing because that's the expected languaging style in that different culture. Certainly, that would influence how power dynamics will play out in that business setting. So understanding the cultural nuances is an important part of the equation and how it is that we can read into someone's not just behavior but perhaps their strengths as well.
Your concept of big Asian energy has a lot of charge to it. Can you explain what it means and how it can inspire bold leadership?
Absolutely. And it's funny, I love that you said that it has a lot of charge to it because it does, doesn't it? It by nature is kind of polarizing in that it stands in something. Really, big Asian energy is just big you energy. Who are you in your most authentic self? And how often do you actually let that part out? When is it that you feel like you're hiding parts of yourself because that's what you're expected to? Perhaps whether or not that expectation is actually said or not. But there's this pressure that we might have to hold ourselves back, to self minimize. Big Asian energy basically says, whatever it is that you are bringing to the table, that value, that light, that strength that you have, it is valid, it belongs, and you should be able to speak up for it. And frankly, that doesn't matter if you're Asian or not. It could be from any background, as long as you yourself have that conviction and strength in that this is who I am. And I'm not going to apologize simply because this is who I am.
Let's get practical with it. So, for someone who might be listening who struggles with self doubt, what's one practical step they can take today to start building confidence?
Great question. I always take a look to say, well, understand our own patterns. We have a
Mm.
true self. Our true self is the kind of the best version of ourselves that's curious, that's creative, that has compassion, that has a lot of strength. Like this is where we want to be leading from. And then we have our role selves that we take on. This is where the self criticism or elements that you mentioned are. And those are always based on stories. So when we're feeling a lack of confidence, it's usually because there's a part of us that believes that we're perhaps not enough in some way. We're not,
Mm.
educated enough, not smart enough, not confident enough, whatever it is. And the way that we can unravel that is just by taking a look at what is being unsaid. So one of the things that I often deal with my clients is they feel imposter syndrome. They feel like, oh, if they have an accomplishment, they haven't truly deserved it. And I'll have them finish a thought and I'll say, well, write out a sentence that basically says, I will finally be good enough when I blank. And that question could be stated anything. I will finally be seen as a good leader when I blank. I'll finally be seen as valuable to my company when I blank. And a lot of times when we start filling out these things, we start seeing some very, I would say, outrageous things. Like, I'll finally be seen as a capable leader when I know everything there is to know about the subject. Or I'll be finally seen as an expert at this when, no one else knows more than I do. And I always love to challenge this because this is when we go in and say, well, is that true? I mean, can you even know it to be true? Like, can anyone truly know everything there is to know about a subject? And would you look at your friends or your coworkers with that same lens that they can only, be stepping into a leader when they've never made mistakes? Is that true? And I think this is where it is that often we shift our viewpoints of not just others, but ourselves as well.
Especially in an era of AI and how much intelligence can be created and so many advances. So let's get tactical with it. I mean, you've built an incredible following. What's one story, John, that you have, or one piece of feedback from your audience that's really stuck with you?
One story. Um, One story that I've always stuck with me, it's about how much we really should value vulnerability. It's something we don't really talk about very much, especially because, as you say, we live in a very polished and in this post AI world, there's so much pressure to maintain that appearance. I was listening to, I was, at the time I was interviewing somebody who works at Adobe, the design software company. They've got an incredible software set and leaders team. And this was right after COVID, and he was sharing how his boss basically came out and gave a talk. And instead of sharing this like big inspirational talk about how it is that they should charge forward and make a change, she focused on how she has been almost struggling a little bit emotionally after COVID and dealing with all of the ups and downs of it. And it created more authenticity and connection within the team after they, kind of checked in with the team afterwards because they resonated with a boss who was going through the same struggles they were. And I think this is where it is that our warmth can very easily and powerfully be built when our focus is not just on our successes, but on the things that we're afraid to be judged by as well.
And John Wang, just before we get to some couple of ways that our listeners can take action with your work, thinking about the story you just shared, if you, maybe this is as a reflective question, if you could go back and give advice to your younger self, what would it be?
I love this question.
Mm.
Think what I would say to myself is stop waiting for permission from other people to do the things that you really want to do. It is such a built-in part of so many of us that we kind of want external feedback to say, you're ready. We see your capabilities. We see your potential. It's time for you to step up. And the truth is nobody ever will. It is entirely up to us to give ourselves that permission to claim the project, to really go after the things that matter to us, and no one else is going to ever be able to fill that role for us until we're ready to do it for ourselves.
Wow, that's a great first step that everyone can take is stop asking for permission
hmm
to embrace bold leadership. Great action step. John Wayne, where can our listeners learn more about your work, connect with you, and get your book?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find Big Asian Energy, again, not just for Asians, but probably resonates quite a bit with your listeners who are at really anywhere you can find books, at Barnes& and Nobles, Amazon, et cetera, et cetera. Just search up Big Asian Energy. If you want to find me on social media, just look up John Wang Official or John Wang Big Asian Energy. And I'm on pretty much all the platforms from Spotify to Instagram to LinkedIn, et cetera.
That's great. John, you reminded me today in this interview on the People Dividend podcast that bold leadership really starts with embracing who you are
hmm
and breaking free from the traps that hold you back and embracing the pathways that empower you. And I think your concept of big Asian energy, it's a call to action for anyone, for everyone who really just wants to step into their power and lead with confidence. So, John, I'm so thankful for you joining and invite my listeners, everyone listening, to connect with John and his work. And so, John, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure.
And just again, everyone who's listening today, if you enjoyed this episode with John, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and tune in to the next episode of the People Dividend podcast. Until then, stay well.